Welcome to the DevLaunch podcast, bringing you insights from industry experts on how to grow the digital agency you love. In today's episode, we welcome back our guest, Snyder, the CEO of Knucklepuck, for round 2. This time, he's sharing the story behind a bold acquisition that didn't go quite as planned, and how it transformed his approach to leadership and strategy. From growing the business to facing the hardest decisions in agency life, Brett opens up about the lessons he's learned and how to thrive after setbacks. Welcome back, Brett, to our part 2 interview with the DevLaunch podcast. Last time you joined us, we talked all things employee experience and hiring best practices. And this time, we're going to dive into a couple other topics we weren't able to get to last time. So I appreciate you taking some additional time to share your thoughts and your insights with us.
Yeah. Hey, I wouldn't be back if the first episode wasn't a blast. So I'm excited to keep this rolling forward.
Love it. I love it. Okay. Well, picking up from where we left off last time, we were talking a lot about, again, employee experience, hiring best practices. You had a lot of really great things to share from an agency's perspective. And one thing I think that ties really nicely into those practices, employee experience, is even just thinking about resourcing for projects, right? So you're talking about how you as an agency, you're using both full-time employees and outsourced partners on specific projects. How would you go about deciding which tasks are to be handled by full-time staff versus contractors?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and one that has definitely started to become more part of our general communications as an industry over the last couple of years. As employee costs have gone up, we've seen kind of biz dev and pipelines start to constrict a little bit. And so for us, it really comes down to our 3 uniques. And when we talk about Knucklepuck and our 3 uniques, we talk about retention, access, and malleability. And so a lot of the part that kind of ties a little bit more into this particular project is much more in that access side of things, where we want our clients to have access to those resources that they need to be successful, whether or not they are full-time staff resources on Knucklepuck's side. And so when I look at this and I look at who we need to be able to give our clients access to, I'm zeroing in a lot on this idea of what are our core competencies versus what I'm going to call ancillary work, outside of our core competencies. And so for Knucklepuck, our primary service offerings are SEO and paid media. We do some content work as kind of under the umbrella of SEO, but to go with the example here, we don't do development work. We had a development shop. We ended up shutting that one down. I think we'll get to talk about that a little bit towards the end of the episode, so spoiler alert there. But it forced us to rethink how we can continue to serve clients that have development needs. And so when we're looking in terms of these primary services, I know I need to be able to put, like, a big part of Knucklepuck's competitive advantage is that I give everybody access to their subject matter experts, because I want them to really understand the project. I want them to understand our client's business at a deeper level, because that informs much more of the strategic direction that we're going to go into. And so when we're talking about, again, that idea of retention, like, we want to build institutional knowledge to ensure we've got good quality and maintain those client relationships. And so when we look at primarily our retainer work in particular, we know that we need to have consistency, and we know we need to be able to make a much more intensive commitment to our clients with these projects. With things like web dev work is kind of what I would call that ancillary work to what we do. We know we need development resources to be able to implement our strategies, everything from analytics tracking to technical SEO updates on the site, building out landing pages for paid media. But these are areas that we can utilize outsourced partners a little bit easier, because we don't need that same level of access and we don't need that same level of institutional knowledge that is not already covered by our full-time resources. And so for us, especially when it comes to web dev work, we don't actively pursue it. And honestly, for most of our clients that would come to us and say we want to do a web overhaul or a new website redesign, we would refer that out, straight up refer that out. But for things where we're looking at, hey, we need to do this Google Analytics audit, or we need a landing page developed, some things that we know that we can create a kind of a self-contained spec or what we actually need to build here, that doesn't require the same high touch type of an environment. And so we utilize, a couple of go-to agencies, some of which we met through the Bureau of Digital, where Tony, you and I connected. But I think we're really kind of we don't want to have to maintain a large in-house team for work that is not a primary function of our revenue and our pipeline.
When you're making the decision to outsource as opposed to keeping that institutional knowledge in, that's
Yeah, I think it's and I have a couple more. I want to see if you had any, like, again, make sure we get a good dialogue for it. But I did want to talk about like the benefits of being nimble and efficient, and the challenges of having to, again, still have our reputation is still on the line, and so I think that's a big part of how we message it. And so I can talk about that as well. We are upfront and transparent with our messaging about the fact that this is, this is not our core competency.
Yeah. Well, Brett, there's something you said that I really appreciated, which is recognizing the pieces that require the institutional knowledge, right? Because like at the end of the day, the agency model itself is predicated on the overall like mind, I guess the value of the collective minds, if you will.
Yeah,
And
we
so,
call that our diversity of thought. That's our phrase for it that we use at Knucklepuck, and the
yeah.
things that we can bring to it, being an agency that can come in and provide that unique perspective. But everything from our recruitment to the way that we sell our projects, we really try to make it clear that the diversity of thought is what is allowing us to be so effective.
Yeah. So what would you say to somebody who, because I've certainly heard on the other side of the spectrum, people who are just like, I'm going to do essentially almost exclusively contractors. I'm not really going to have any employees or very few employees. What would you say to somebody who would come back to you and say, well, I can keep just as much of the institutional knowledge just by keeping people as contractors? Like, why would the employees need to be the place where that institutional knowledge is saved?
Yeah, I think, and this is not to say that it can't work. I know a number of people who run agencies that are entirely based on contractors. I know a lot of people who have taken an in-house full-time team and, gone offshore and nearshore with it. I think for us, because we have such a high-touch kind of relationship with our clients, that I need to be able to put my faith and my reputation or my business reputation behind resources that I know I have more control over how they operate. And this isn't to suggest that we micromanage our people, but we do need to know that they are bought into the way Knucklepuck operates, that this is their primary focus for what we're looking at. And I think for a lot of our clients, because we view our services as consulting services, there isn't this, objective checklist that somebody can give us and then we go and we implement it. A lot of times we're the ones having to write the checklist. We're building the strategy. We're building the project plan out for it. And again, it certainly can work with contractors, but there's a couple of things that I have found and why I've made more of a commitment toward full-time employees, FTEs, for Knucklepuck. One of the big pieces of that, as I mentioned before, is just the ability to know that we've got consistent branding and brand messaging. That I like to say, like, you're not hiring a person, you're hiring Knucklepuck, which is why when I started it, I never wanted my name on the business. I never wanted to be Brett Snyder anything, because I didn't want our clients to have misaligned expectations that they're going to get me. And that continues to this day. And it's kind of shifted a little bit since I'm not in the day-to-day, that I tell people, you don't want me, right? Like, you want the people who are the real experts in here. I think it also gives us an opportunity to, because we're selling more retainer services, we're on annual contracts and larger commitments. Most of our projects on an annual basis are going to start close to 50, 60K. And so when we're making we're asking these kind of commitments, that was one of the areas that I felt that I would be able to retain, the institutional knowledge, the process, process engineering, et cetera, if I knew that I had folks that this was their full-time focus. Contractors, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of benefits for scaling up and down. You can, if you have good processes, or, especially with AI taking more and more of a role in this, I think you'll start to see more people being comfortable with that outsourced model. But for me, I want to be able to know that I'm not having to tell somebody at Knucklepuck how to do their job. Mm-hmm. We hire people, we compensate people as full-time employees with the expectation that they're going to be able to represent our brand, and they're going to be able to help our clients fulfill their goals. Hmm. And so I think another big piece for that is part of me just on a personal level. Like, I started Knucklepuck because I wanted to be able to create jobs. And I wanted to be able to create a lifestyle for not just our clients that we serve, but for the people that we have the opportunity to work with. And I think a big part of that also helps us to build more of a culture and more of that diversity of thought that I mentioned before, when we know that we've got folks that we can make more of an investment in on our end. And so I think if you want speed, if you want like to be really, really quick with it, to scale up and down, if you've got variable, like your pipeline is variable where you might have a ton of work this quarter, but then that might dry up in the future. Yeah, I can see a stronger argument for having more of an outsourced team. But for us and the way our business is set up, it's a lot of recurring revenue. We've got clients that have been with us for many, many years. And with those kind of commitments that we ask our clients to make from us, and with the ROI we know that we need to deliver on our fees, I have always found that it's a lot. I have found, for at least in our 10-year history, that that's been a much more successful outlet for us to be able to get the most out of our people.
Well, and I think you touched on something right there where you said the core of your business, or the majority of your business, is recurring in nature. There's a lot of retainer work that you're doing. And so therefore it makes a lot more sense to match the revenue to that cost versus, a largely project oriented agency. I got to imagine it's going to be way more appealing to match up that risk, the costs, the contractor costs being variable with the variable revenue. Is that part of the reason? Is that one of the main reasons why you guys had leaned more towards that? Or I guess, were there other factors that we haven't talked about yet?
I mean, that's definitely a big part of it, right? Because we know that we've got to have these things that we can do. We are getting these longer term commitments, so we want to make a longer term commitment. And, again, churn happens, employee turnover happens, whether you have contractors, whether you have FTEs. But I feel like, again, we can position ourselves to our clients to say, we've got folks that have chosen this is their career, that they've chosen that they want to bring their talents to Knucklepuck and they want to help people under kind of Knucklepuck's banner, and they have made that commitment to us. And so I think that it's hard. It's kind of an intangible thing to talk about, that idea of commitment into the brand and commitment to our clients. But I do feel like with contractors, there is an inherent understanding that this is an as needed relationship. Whereas with FTEs, if work is slow, I know I can turn things around to say like, hey, what can we do for Knucklepuck's, marketing? What can we do for some of our content marketing or our pieces here? Because I know that I've got that team that is already committed and they want to do well. They want to do good work for us here. And so that has been another one of the areas of just being able to know that my expectations of the team are consistent with my commitment to them and commitment to their salary, commitment to benefits. Again, it's certainly not the cheaper option, but like I said before, if we want great people, we want to make sure that we can have a compelling package that's going to let people be successful and let people feel committed to their career.
Yeah, I love that. Well, so maybe even just diving further in here, I'm just thinking about a couple of examples where you're presented with new work, net new work, and maybe you don't have the capacity to do it, or maybe not even the direct expertise. At what point do you decide we're going to keep this under our banner, but just subcontract it out versus, hey, prospect, I want to make sure that you just work directly with the people who are going to do fulfillment on this particular piece. And then you just connect them up directly with, whoever those service providers are. Like, how do you make that decision between those two?
I love that you use the word fulfillment, because I think that is kind of where my perspective tips from one to the other, where I would say fulfillment and kind of put that up against strategy. And if I want Knucklepuck to be able to do the strategy work. If we can do strategy and fulfillment, great. But if it's just a fulfillment piece, or if it's something that I don't feel that we can do the strategic side. So again, large scale web projects, a whole web rebuild, a migration from one platform to another. And that requires a certain amount of strategic oversight that I don't staff. And so in those types of relationships, that's when I will refer it out. We have a couple of trusted partners that we've worked with at varying levels. Right? So if I know somebody's coming in here and they just want a small website rebuild, I'll say, all right, even if I could do this with margin on it, it's going to be probably me having to work on it because my team isn't focused on web PM and things like that. When we're looking at it, I think the turning point to me is, again, how much of the fulfillment do I feel like we need to control versus how much of it is strategy? I tend not to like the in-between. I tend not to like hey, we're going to stay involved. We're going to PM the project, but you're going to do fulfillment. Or we want to be like CC'd and kept in the loop, because I feel like that adds friction that doesn't benefit anybody. Again, aside from maybe, bottom line, maybe financials, Knucklepuck is able to pull in more margin for it. but these things have intangible costs to them. And I think we learned that when I shut down the web department and we tried to continue offering some of these services just as a way to get our clients, migrated over to other partners or ones that were in the middle of these web builds. And it was a huge distraction from the core focus of our marketing, our SEO, and our paid services. And so, when we're looking at it from that perspective, that's kind of where I dial in on it, is like, if it's just fulfillment and it's something that is that ancillary work, like I talked about before, I'll just refer it out, and some of our clients we have like referral agreements with, kind of reciprocal ones, because again, a lot of our partners are in the same position that I am, that maybe they do development work or they do app work, but they don't do marketing. And so we found a way to kind of specialize in our services. And then because we've been around for so long, because we had this business, sticking with the web dev example, I know what a good partner looks like. I know how to vet a good analytics partner or a good web dev vendor. I know who I would be willing to say, if you liked talking to me and you liked the way that I approach, our work, you are going to like these people over at this other partner for it, because there's a consistency to that. In the web work, we actually have it was what I considered one of our biggest competitors when we were in the business, is now our kind of one of our primary referral partners for these large scale projects, because I know how good they are. And because I can look at it and say, I have confidence that my recommendation here is going to be valuable, because that's where your reputation, can come and go, is if you're referring things out or you try to hold on to projects that you just want a little piece of the pie, that is not going to have additional referrals down the line. That's not going to have somebody who's going to say, I really loved what Knucklepuck did in this project for us here. So they're going to love maybe what the partner does. Mm-hmm. They may, question what our role is. They may really, say, hey, it was great to have Knucklepuck steering the ship for it. But a lot of it comes down to, to opportunity costs. Yeah. Right? Our time is mutually exclusive. Our resources and our people and their effort can only go to so many things. And if we're looking at some of these where people are running off and trying to fit in things that, maybe we can book a couple grand in revenue for PM, is still an adapted state for most of our team. So then it gets into quality of the work. It gets into satisfaction and burnout on my team if people are being asked to fulfill roles that are not really in their core competency. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I like to be able to go out there and I tell these prospects straight up, it's like, we don't do this work. Like, I don't work for these other companies, but I know that they will have a fair and honest conversation with you. That's actually the phrase I used today. I had one of these referrals that worked out, and the woman was asking, like, I liked talking to you about it. I think I like the way you think. I was like, that's great. You're going to like these folks over here because they think in a similar way, but they do the service you need, and I do not. And so you may like the way I think and the way I talk about it, but I'm not going to be able to do the fulfillment. And so that's where, when we've built up a little Rolodex of our own kind of personal referral network. So that way we can maintain our reputation. And in a lot of ways, we have these clients that will come back and refer us over marketing work in the future. We've had folks that have chosen not to work with us because we said, hey, this isn't the right size project for us. And then they come back to us with something else. And I have found that in that kind of referral network and that reputation and brand reputation is invaluable if you're really committed to an agency career. Yeah. If I was trying to do an exit in the next 2 to 3 years, then maybe I would be finding ways to reduce, our head count, maybe find ways to ramp up what we can pull in from revenue elsewhere. But that's not my goal for Knucklepuck. And so for us, I really want to be able to go in there and say, these are the things that we're good at. This is what I want to be known for. And I want to be able to earn it. I want to know that we are legitimately cream of the crop when it comes to SEO and paid. When we actually added paid to Knucklepuck, it's got to be 9 years ago. So I started it as an SEO consultant a little over 10 years ago. I said I would never do a service we couldn't do as well as I could do SEO. And I think a lot of that still stands, but maybe not I do SEO, maybe how Knucklepuck does SEO. And I think that has been really, really valuable for it, because it's just a matter of trust. It's making sure that people know that they're going to get trustworthy referrals. A lot of people who are coming in for marketing or dev work, some people have a lot of experience in it. They know what they're doing. Some people don't, and they don't understand really what goes into it. They don't understand why somebody who tells you they can build you a whole new website upgrade in 4 weeks with 1,000 SKUs on it is probably not being wholly honest with you.
Hmm.
And so that's one of the areas that I think our brand reputation is so, so important. I think that's what's allowed us to be able to weather tough periods like COVID and other places here where we know that our clients can trust us. And we've seen this happen with clients that have come to us. As soon as an agency tries to sell services that are beyond their core competencies, you see the cracks in the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
We had one of our clients that came to us several years ago, and they're like, "We have a paid firm that we actually think they're pretty good. We think I like working with them." But they sold us SEO and they took us for a ride. And now all of a sudden, however good their paid work was, the client was no longer interested in it because they didn't feel like you trust them anymore.
Yeah, you have a bad taste in your mouth when you have an experience like that. And I think something that you had said earlier too is essentially, I mean, this is what I'm deriving from what you had said, but essentially, when you play that role as you're outsourcing, you're still keeping it under your banner, but you're just subcontracting out some of the work. Really, at the end of the day, like the money that you are being paid, the net that you are getting from that is just project management revenue, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
not actually fulfilling the work. So the other question you have to ask, I would imagine, is project management a core value driver for what our core team provides? And I'd say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say if you find as an agency, you typically outperform when it comes to project management. You have exceptional project management processes and methodology and way of connecting with your clients. Maybe there's something there. Maybe it's worth it to explore something that you're maybe not a expert in. But for a lot of boutique agencies like Knucklepuck, most of the time, like the thing that puts you on the map is not project management. It's the unique craft that you have, right?
Yeah, I think it's hard to separate out project management from any sort of professional services and consulting because you kind of have to have it. I
Hmm.
think it's a matter of if you go into it and say like, hey, think about it in like construction. It's like, or maybe a better one, think about it in lawyers. My wife went to law school. She works for the government. She's a federal government employee, doesn't practice law. When I started Knucklepuck, I kept asking her to review contracts and look at these pieces. And she's like, I'm not that kind of lawyer, right? Like, I understand how to read these. I took contract law, but I'm not that kind of lawyer. And she's like, if you broke your leg, you would not go to a brain surgeon and ask them and expect a legitimate diagnosis. Could be the greatest brain surgeon on the planet, could win every award under the sun, but they're still probably not going to be as good at orthopedic medicine. And so I think when project management, when we talk about it, because we're a consulting services, I think that I would say that that's something that we're very, very strong at in the context of our SEO and our paid consulting. We understand how to have the communications with our client. We understand how to help them see ROI, to help them understand when the data is telling us that this is maybe not the direction that we should be going because we have that skill set for it. Now, again, if we needed a different type of doctor, then the PM piece is going to be important either way. And to your point about that being a successful way for an agency to operate, if they are really, really strong on PM, I would agree with that. And the folks that I know that run really good agencies that are primarily on outsourced or contractors are ones that have said, we are going to have the project management, we're going to have what I called earlier, the strategy side of it is really their bread and butter, because then they bake in the cogs for whatever the outsourced vendor is, but they know that you're coming to me for my vision for your project and my ability to shepherd us through the various phases of the project. For Knucklepuck, we're very good at that with SEO and paid. With dev, again, we could do it. We went to law school, in this, or went to med school in this analogy, but it's not something that we are going to be the best option for.
Yeah. And I mean, in the example you were giving earlier too, it sounds like for the really complicated, huge builds or maybe large, migration projects, it doesn't make any sense for you guys to be heading up that under your banner. But, like most SEO or most campaigns or whatever that you're running, I imagine there's probably going to be a little bit of web dev kind of work. So some of those like ancillary pieces might make sense to put under your banner.
Yep, and it is, and those are ones that are still under the strategic direction of our consultants. And I think what also is something different about the way that Knucklepuck operates is we don't have standalone project managers. So our SEO and our paid consultants, the people who are actually doing the work inside your campaigns or on your website are the people that you are talking to. They are the people that you're interacting with directly. And so project management is kind of a function of their role as an SEO or a paid consultant and these various services for it. And that is kind of born out of an experience I had at a previous agency that I worked at before Knucklepuck, where there was this PM role, but it was almost like triage. And it was almost like the client would ask a question, a PM would sit there, try to distill it down, try to forward that along to us on the SEO side. I was the director of SEO, at this agency. And things always get lost in translation there. And so I think that's where, if you're going to be successful with that kind of model, is you need somebody who can translate strategic vision into fulfillment resources. And I think for us, we have kind of rolled those in together because, again, going back to that retention of institutional knowledge, access to our people as being two of our three uniques.
That's a really interesting perspective. I think I've heard something similar in the software development world, where there's maybe more of a leaning towards, we want to bring in senior developers who can, maybe they're not writing all the lines of code, but they are kind of acting essentially as kind of that business analyst, project manager, and also kind of leading, like you're saying, kind of the strategic direction with some of the clients that they're working on. That's an interesting take.
It's a rare breed in engineers. Not to generalize here, but it is a rare breed in engineers who are much more focused. Again, I'm talking about development as a function of engineering. They're different skill sets. They're different parts of your brain. And if you're not actively working both parts of your brain, which again, you can do the jack of all trades, master of none argument, but I have found that for marketing services are a little bit less, it's a little bit less of a unicorn hunting to find somebody who can manage those kind of, we'll call them soft skills and hard skills, to not to overgeneralize here. But I think that was something that I did learn with, like dev resources and engineers. I know a handful of them in my entire network that can do both, and they're very comfortable and well compensated and well protected in their role because of how valuable that skill set is.
Yeah. Or if we're honest, they probably have themselves started their own agency because they are a kind of a unicorn pairing there. Now, you talked about a previous exposure or experience with web dev. Would you mind diving in? I think maybe for our listeners, in the previous episode, I think you had mentioned briefly about this, where you guys were SEO, you brought in kind of a practice for web dev, you ran that for a little while, and ultimately decided to kind of close that work down. Would you mind just sharing a little bit more of that story with us?
Yeah, and I'll give you a lot of credit for this as well, because I've never really spoken publicly about this. This is one of those areas that, again, when you shut something down, like there's a certain amount of loss and kind of sense of failure to it. But I give you a lot of credit for encouraging me to look at this as an opportunity to help other people learn from, I won't even call them my mistakes, learn from my experience here. Because I did acquire a small web dev shop probably 2018, maybe around there. And the idea is that we were really, really strong on the marketing side. Our recurring revenue was great. We had good margins for recurring consulting work. And I looked at this as an opportunity to diversify our business by bringing in web dev, which is much more project-based, but with some of the things and with the company that I acquired, a certain kind of code base in there that was going to provide significant efficiencies of scale. And so people don't scale. There's a lot of arguments to be made for that. You cannot just squeeze more out of people, but you can squeeze more out of code. And so when I looked at this and I started vetting this opportunity, I said, wow, this is going to be like more project-based work. It's a different business model, but it does diversify our portfolio away from just entirely recurring revenue selling project hours, where we could sell outcomes much more easily with the web work. We could say, here are the components. This is market rate for those components, because we have built this well-engineered kind of code base and platform. We can charge market rates when it doesn't require based on hours. We could sell the components. We could sell the modules for it. And so that was the original intent behind it. Timing of it was kind of tough because we almost had a couple of years in almost re-startup mode, trying to build that reputation. We were going a lot of work in the association space, And a lot of our web projects we were targeting, our average was like 75 to 135,000. So this is not your, small, little WordPress, Wix, Squarespace site. We're talking heavy integrations, large member databases, single sign-on and variable access throughout the site. And so it took us a couple of years to really start building that momentum for it. And I took some losses on that line of business with the expectation that it would kind of turn the corner. And then COVID happened. And that was one where, again, hindsight is 2020, but nobody could have predicted this global pandemic. And for our recurring revenue work, it was pretty stable, actually. We were pretty well protected because we had built enough of a reputation in there. We were part of their organization already. But on the web-based, the web dev, project-based work, RFPs dried up. Even the clients that we were already working with. I've told this story a number of times to put in perspective, because the association space is one that, again, everything is variable, but there are a lot of ones that are on outdated legacy platforms, not necessarily on the bleeding edge of new technology. And so we had one client that we were working with, actually fully engaged, already working the project, that had to pause for almost 6 months. And the first thing they had to do is they canceled our meeting because it was my turn to go to the office and pull the file cabinet out of my drawer out of the file cabinet and take it home. Because a lot of this wasn't prepared for some of this big technical shift for it. And so focus when there's budget involved for technological advancements, like these large scale web projects were ones that slowed down a lot. And as I mentioned before, we were very much on full-time employees, even with the web dev project, for the same reasons I talked about before. We wanted to have control over the full process for it. We wanted to know that we were really understanding what our clients were going for. And so after going for a couple of years and taking some losses on that line of business, then seeing the pipeline dry up, not just for us, for everybody, in a lot of ways. And we were a little bit too far outside of brand reputation to have the ones where we knew we would get some of this upsell work. We didn't have a book of business that we could come back in and do small enhancements for. We were still trying to build that reputation for it. And so that started to get to a point where if it weren't for PPP, I wouldn't have been able to sustain that staff for more than 90 days, honestly. PPP allowed us to be able to keep that team together and to weather it enough so that we could start at least being able to book some new revenue again. But it was very challenging. It did take my focus away from the marketing side of things. It was stable and working, but like anything, if you're not continuously trying to stay on top of the field for it, there is almost a little bit of atrophy. You talk about your reputation, your brand visibility. When I was spending 70, 80+% of my time trying to go out there and build a reputation from a website development standpoint, that took the time away from our marketing services. And so after several years, we were really starting to look at it and be like, it's kind of make or break time. We were, still maintain the staff. I still kept salaries where they were, even though I was taking losses on it. And then the VP, who I had acquired his business, quit out of nowhere. Like no notice, no real update. Again, it's not been it was not an amicable split, because I was left in a really, really bad position, and it was tough for me to try to figure out how we deal with some of these projects that we already had in place. And that was one of the big turning points for me, because we probably had $600K in the pipeline of projects that were we were far along. I would say if we kept the business, we would close 70-80% of that pipeline. But when this person left, I looked at it and I said, if I had 30 days, 45 days to find another captain of the ship, we could do this. But I didn't. And that's when I had to turn around and I looked at all these and I had to call these leads and basically say, I can't take this project. I have to withdraw from consideration for it. And what made it even harder is that I couldn't even really tell them why, because we had ongoing projects. I had legal exposure on projects that we had committed to, a lot of ones we've been paid a significant sum of money on. And I needed to find a way to make sure that I could get this work done before it bled me out, and bled me dry on the employee resources. And so I had to call a lot of these people, some of the hardest conversations I've had to have in this business. Some people understood, Some people did not. And that was really tough to have. I got borderline shouted at. And so it's like, this is
Wow.
how you do business? We've been pushing this for the last like 6 weeks, and we get to the end here and I'm ready to sign and you pull out. This is the way you do business.
Oh,
And I said, yes, because I cannot deliver on the work. I
yeah.
cannot make this commitment to you because I do not have the resources that I feel I can be successful at this.
I mean, for that though, were they already existing clients on the SEO and paid media side, or were they
No,
net
they
new?
were new ones, and again, because it was so high, it was so complex. Like I had the developers that I thought could
Yeah.
execute on it, but I didn't have somebody who could write the plan
Yeah.
and could really fill in and understood how to extract what people needed and do this like 300 line, because we did very detailed line item scopes. It's how we were able to really forecast our margin and things like that.
Hmm.
And that was one where people would ask me, it's like, can't you outsource it? Can't you just get it done? It's like, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Not to the standard that I want to.
And I think it gets back to what we were talking about before, where it's like, you can outsource the tactical, like you can outsource those lower level, kind of tasks. It's really hard when you lose somebody who is that kind of that core brain trust and strategic mind on a particular set of services or fulfillment. When they leave, it's very hard to right that ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said, you always want to have redundancies in it, but the team was, again, we were right at that point where we couldn't get over the humps where I knew that, hey, we do have redundancies built into the system. There was a single point of failure and it failed. And I think that was one where no agency owner or manager or anybody in a leadership position should expect their people to stay forever.
Yeah.
I talk about this very, very openly. I say, I don't expect anybody to stay here forever, but it's my job every day to convince you that you should stay here forever, that this is a place where you can be successful. And I've talked a lot about, especially with younger folks that I've mentored, but there is a way to leave a company with a strong reputation intact. There is a way to burn every bridge in the book. And to me, I kind of come down to the idea of trust versus loyalty. I don't expect loyalty. I think it would be naive for any employer to just expect blind loyalty to their business. You need to expect people to pursue things that are going to be in their best interest. And so for me, I look at that as like, I didn't expect loyalty, but I did have an expectation of trust that burned me. I did not think that this person would leave in the way that he did. I thought that at least if this was going to happen, he would give me enough notice that I had shown him through many years that like I will work with people in this. And it turns out I had to turn around and I had to fire his brother. We had new people that he had hired this whole team for it, and he left them out to dry, and I had to eat it because I couldn't continue to afford to pay them for these things because I didn't have enough time to be able to replace and didn't even have an option. So on the one hand, it made it an easier decision because the decision was kind of made for me. On the other, it was really, really, really challenging to try to transition out at that type of a timeline. And that's when we found our first outsourced partners because we had some of these ongoing projects that I had to finish. Look, I literally had to sit there and I was talking to lawyers and being like, looking at our MSA, it's like, can I get sued for this? Can I get sued for breach of contract if I don't deliver on this scope? And they were like, you can always get sued. But I think I had to look at it and say, what do I feel comfortable that I can handle before I run out of money, or before I mortgage the successful, profitable marketing side of the business to try to retain resources for longer than I could.
Yeah.
And so that was the one where, and it's why I haven't really talked about it publicly because it was a really, really, really tough time. That was probably the second darkest period in the 10 years that I've had Knucklepuck because I had so few options. And it really came down to, I ended up carrying it. Like I ended up trying to pull these things through. It cost me some very, very important relationships and referral relationships because one of these projects we worked at was brought in by, another agency that I've known for my whole career. That I built a really strong partnership with their leadership, with the delivery, and it kind of went up in flames a little bit. And we've recovered to a certain extent, and a lot of that is on me because I wasn't able to fulfill what I had set out there and I had promised to do. And so I think that was the one. If I can give any advice to anybody who's in these type of situations where, it took me a long time to say this. I used to always say, like, regrets are unprofessional. It's a quote from one of the Bond movies where, somebody asked M if she had any regrets, and she said, no, regrets are unprofessional, because there's always something that you could learn from it. And it took me probably until today before I'd be willing to say I don't regret that acquisition, because it did take so much more from me than it did. I probably lost conservatively 500K on this in the last couple of years, just watching it siphon out, get money that didn't go to my marketing team, didn't go to growth efforts on the marketing side. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I gained a better understanding of how web development worked. I solidified my commitment to full-time employees for this strategic consulting work, but also opened up my mind to what sort of things can be outsourced. Yeah. Because I had to outsource some of the final fulfillment of these projects that were in place. Yeah. And so it's taken a long time to kind of move past that, but I do think that it's something that any good leader needs to be willing to say, I made a mistake, and whether or not this mistake was quote unquote worth it, it still happened. You can't go back and change it. You can't go and make a different decision than you did previously.
Well,
but
I think yeah, I mean, I wanted to just affirm, like, you took a risk. Like that's the reality, right? You took a risk, you did this acquisition. And I think that just goes to show you too that, like, you hear about these amazing stories of people taking risks, and then it turned out this incredible growth trajectory and all that stuff. And then there's also other stories like this where, you had the best information in front of you and you made the best decision you could with the information, and it still resulted in this. I think something I want to dive into here is, if we go all the way back to that initial decision, one of the things I wrote down here was the impetus for acquiring, or the impetus for going into web dev, was this desire for diversification. And at the time, if you can remember back to that 2018 timeframe, would you feel comfortable sharing, like, where were you at, like, even just revenues wise? Were you past your 7-figure mark, and because of that trying to? Okay.
We were, yeah. We got to the 7-figure mark pretty quickly in the first year or two. So I brought on some investment partners who brought us some large projects, and we had some really, really large ones. And that's what gave me the confidence to say, hey, we have good profitability on the marketing side. We have some established things on the marketing side. And I wasn't trying to start up a whole new business. I did a little, like, acquisition. So I could say there is some, I'm buying a code base. I'm buying the developers that are familiar with it and looking at those, what they can deliver on it. But I think when it really got down to it, I also said I didn't have good financial forecasting. And so I think that was one of the areas where, I have since resolved that. We have a fantastic fractional CFO now that is helping me see what we can do with the business and make more informed decisions. But I think if there's something I could give to advice going back into it, like, I saw all the upside, and I saw the risk for it, but I'm an optimist at heart, and I think that, I would encourage people who are considering this to say, where are your exits in the first 30, 90, 180 days after this? Because the longer that it continues, the harder it is to separate it. The more you're going to have to sacrifice if it does eventually fail. And I think if I had looked at this and I had said, all right, at 30 days, we said that we'd be here. We're a little short, but, like, I make another decision. You either reaffirm your decision or you change your decision. And I think that would be the one piece that I would encourage anybody who's looking at this to do, is you have to bake in some sort of calculus about what happens if it fails and what happens if this person leaves. And I learned a lot about how we've kind of continued to run the business since then. But I think that was an area that was really tough, because I didn't trust my own kind of insights on if something wasn't working. I let my optimism, and what I think is not an uncommon trait among leaders, is we don't want to fail, right? Like, we don't want to have to go out there and say, I tried this, it didn't work. We don't want to go out there and say, I spent all this money and I thought that I would recover it, but I didn't. And it was actually really great to, once I started talking about inside my network with it, that everybody has a story like that they don't share. Everybody knows somebody. I had one of our referral partners who had referred us a bunch of business and, stood to kind of take a hit from their reputation if we failed at this, that reached out to me and be like, I get it. Like it's, you got to fix it. You got to get it done. But I think that not having a clear check for me to say, is this working or not? And because there's always more to do, there's always more you can achieve. But I think that was the one, as I was doing this kind of acquisition calculus and the different things that I'd want to bring in and know, like I knew what revenue targets I had to hit. I knew how many projects that we had to be able to bring in. We did the I didn't go into it ignorant or uninformed, but I think I did all the due diligence up front, and then I didn't do ongoing due diligence as to whether or not the business was actually going to be successful for us.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I got caught off guard by some of these other areas for it, where, I wasn't prepared for somebody else to shake the bottle.
Yeah.
And then once that happened, because I wasn't prepared for that, that's where, you're dropping Mentos in a Coke bottle and it's going all over the place.
I mean, so maybe if we could try to take out the piece of losing that key person, because it sounds like that was a pretty significant like nail in the coffin of why this needed to kind of wind down on the web dev side. Thinking back again to that diversification question, because I think it's actually a question that comes up more often than I have realized before this conversation, is I think what I've heard from a lot of digital agency owners is they get to this point in their growth where they see maybe it's a plateau or there's something in the horizon, at least in their perception, where the answer in their mind is diversification is going to be a solution to whatever that problem is. Can you remember back, like when you were thinking diversification would be really great, what was the problem, fundamentally the problem that you were seeing that you were trying to solve for?
Ambition, maybe, or misplaced ambition. I think that we had gotten to the point at that point where the marketing side was pretty stable. It was reliable. We had somewhat reliable like growth. We had reliable churn. We didn't have any projects that were more than 20-25% of our book. And so I looked at it and said, all right, like if this is in good shape, like what else can I be doing to advance my goals of having a lifestyle business? Can I bring jobs to more people? Can I offer people an environment where they can work in that I've been able to do on the marketing side? And so to me, it was a growth strategy. It wasn't a survival strategy. It wasn't something that I looked at. So I said, I want to protect the future of Knucklepuck. It was ambitious to want to grow. It was ambitious to be able to say, if I could do this, I could do another 1.2 million in revenue with a reasonable number of projects at a crazy good margin for it. And that was realistic to me in terms of what I saw for that line of business. And then, so again, it wasn't to try to protect. I think a lot of people talk about diversification in terms of mitigating risk. To me, I looked at it as diversification as all the upside. Now I had the opportunity to say, I've got profitable marketing work, recurring consulting work. Could I get higher margin project-based work so that both of these things can kind of raise separately? And that's where I probably should have done separate P&Ls, honestly, because of the way that I looked at that as an opportunity to diversify in a growth mindset.
That's super interesting. Yeah. So it sounds like one of the hypotheses that was underlying it. So first and foremost, diversification was not born out of a place of I want to mitigate risks, but rather diversification was seen as a growth strategy. So that's one thing I heard you say. And then another thing is there's a hypothesis that underlied the web dev side, which is to say project-based work comes with a higher gross margin, was the perception in your mind. In reality, how did that actually play out?
It kind of did. I think we didn't get to a critical volume of work. All right. It was one we were still doing good margins for it on the actual work that we got, but the team was very expensive. And so I needed to be able to do more projects, we were ramping up to it. Like I said, right when COVID happened, we were ramping up to it. So the margins were there. We understood the margins for the most part. They weren't as high as, we thought they would be, but they were significantly higher than the margins on our marketing work because, we were selling code. We could sell something at a price point rather than selling retainer hours, which is what we do on the marketing side. And so for me, it really just, we didn't get a critical volume of work for it to be able to actually kind of get into orbit, right? If you think about, there's a certain amount of acceleration and like revenue acceleration you need to be able to get out of the atmosphere and reach orbit. And so while everything was going the way we wanted to, the margins were within what I was comfortable with. We needed more projects, and we had the capacity for it. We had a full-time team that was maybe 30% utilized.
Hmm.
And so again, like the numbers all worked in terms of like, all right, we're doing good margin on this. We're getting close to like breaking even, and our team's not even half utilized. We just didn't, by the time we tried to ramp up to be able to have enough volume of work that we could fully utilize the team and hit the margins that we wanted to, the pipelines really started to dry up, and we frankly never recovered.
Yeah. And I will just say, like, from my experience working with software development agencies, especially, I know that client acquisition can be a real challenge, like, not to say that marketing agency side isn't. I think all agencies to some extent have a struggle with client acquisition. I think by the very nature of what a marketing agency is doing, in theory, if you are a good marketing agency, you're going to have, a good deal flow kind of coming in. But
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to more technical trades like web development or software development or even somewhat design, it can be really hard to get a good, consistent client acquisition system. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna drop a theory here, and then you can tell me if I'm totally off my rocker. But my theory is that if this acquisition was aligned in such a way where the types of clients that you were working with on the web dev side were a direct upsell from your existing client base, or vice versa, where there's a clear overlap in terms of the niche that you're serving or the type of buyer that you're reaching, you might have had a different outcome.
100%. 100%. There was not a lot of overlap between the projects. The people who came with us for marketing that are willing and able to spend the budgets that they have typically already invested in a strong website, right? And like I've had people be like, you shouldn't hire us or any agency until you go and rebuild your website. And then when we decided, because we had this was the company that I had acquired had a footprint already in this association space that we really wanted to push there. We knew that we could do it, or we believed that we could do it, but there wasn't overlap for it. These were member-based organizations that they don't need SEO in the same way, because they're dealing with members or their trade organizations. And so people aren't going out there and Googling, what organization should I join? Theirs was much more of a, yeah, we can use this to try to promote and push our content out, but there was very little overlap between the two of them. So you're exactly right there. And even if it was one where we weren't going to, we could find some overlap or some cross sell opportunities between them. Like even this would could it funnel into marketing work after launch? Could it be something that we are building it with the plan? We have all these tools for content management that are going to allow us to be more effective on the SEO side down the road. I think that is you're absolutely right on that. That's why I said I probably should have had two P&Ls. And
Yeah.
I probably should have structured this almost as two separate business lines that were going to be evaluated independently of one another. And I think that also would have helped me see the cracks in the foundation a little bit
Yes.
earlier. And so I 100% agree with that. I think not being able to fish in the same pond made it very, very difficult to fish.
Yeah, I mean, your client acquisition costs had to have been astronomical in comparison to and I apologize for the buzzwordy sound, the synergistic play would have been, which is, a more, aligned acquisition. And
Mm-hmm.
so all this to say, Brett, I think you took the right risk in the sense that you were moving in the right direction. You knew that you had a solid business model, and you were looking for diversification as a growth mechanism, not necessarily just as a risk mitigation. I think that's amazing. I'm so glad that you did that. And I think maybe the lesson that we're learning from this is when you assess acquisitions, you have to think holistically, especially about the client acquisition integration. If you have a very complementary audience in both of the businesses, your main business and the acquiring business, the business you're going to acquire, there is necessarily going to be some extra boost in your growth. But when you have two very separate circles, even if you had excellent execution skills, that's going to be a very hard business to maintain in tandem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even if you're looking at other options where, we looked at doing as an acquisition, like it made like another option could have been investing in the business, right? Investing in rather than acquiring it. Can I come in, take a stake in it, invest in the business, but it's not something that is then wholly responsible for Knucklepuck to be able to manage. So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways that you can look into that. These things can be done effectively. But yeah, and when the circles don't intersect, at all, like my time was being split, and again, time is mutually exclusive. And so time that I spent on one side of the business was not being spent on the other, and so I think that's definitely valid.
Yeah. Well, one last little thing I'm hearing from your story here, because I do think this is a really helpful story for our listeners to hear. It's not a failure. It's only a failure if we didn't learn from it. Is you also just mentioned the impact that having this fractional CFO, which I'm a good friend of his. He's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. I'm so glad you guys are working together.
Mm-hmm.
But the impact of having somebody like that in your corner, and you even contrast that to, man, when I was back in the situation before, I probably would have really benefited from somebody like who I have right now. And I think if I were to convey something to our listeners, it would be there needs to be a category for the finance person who's not just doing your books to do your taxes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because been doing your taxes just like every single year, like every other taxpayer. But the tax documents do not give you the type of insight that you were looking for, that you really needed to make better informed decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think being able to wrangle the data for it, seeing like I'm a pretty smart guy. I'm pretty good at math. I can do when I brought on my partners, I did most of the math to value the business myself. When I bought out majority of my partner stake, I did the math myself. But forecasting some of these other pieces where you're not going to see the horizon, the long-term horizon of when this is going to actually bear out for you is something that I've been super grateful for Paul's influence, because it's also, and I'll give him a lot of credit for this as well, where he isn't in the business. Right? He isn't somebody who works for Knucklepuck. And so he's not making the decisions, but he's advising me and giving me the information so that as a leader, I can make informed decisions based on good data. And I think that's one of the things that was really, really valuable about Paul in particular and his approach to things. And when I've talked to folks, this comes up in like operations people. Like if you have people who really can understand how to advise on what needs to be done for it so that the leadership can make informed decisions. Like that was if I had that, I think this could have been a different story. I think I could have potentially made changes to the business earlier that would not have bled out our funds as quickly as I did. We may have tried to do fractional work before, or like outsourced work earlier. We say, hey, we don't need the developers full time necessarily. Can we do it without them? Or can we do it with the strategic person and then source more cost-effective resources from that side of things? And then being able to, so again, good leaders know the questions to ask, but when to be able to come back and somebody will say, all right, I ran the numbers for you based on these assumptions. This is what I think is going to happen. I think this is risky. I think this is a great play. I think this is a no-brainer. I can be able to have some of those things in there that is informed by outside expertise. It's kind of the same thing that we were talking before about those core competencies. Somebody if you have focus, it can be internally, it can be a full-time employee, it can be a partner, it can be a fractional CFO like I have, but somebody who has a very, very clear role and the trust in their ability to properly advise in that role is worth more than its weight in gold.
Totally agree. I mean, I am a little bit biased on that, but I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree with it for sure. And all these examples that you're giving, I think just again speak to the power of having real data insights into your data and having clarity on that. And it's like you said, sometimes you're going to make the same decision, but knowing the risks before you get into making those decisions, it will severely impact your mental calculus about like
Mm-hmm.
how do we now proceed.
Yeah, because there's no such thing as like a plan that's going to take you all the way to the end. It's kind of like I would say this in business. There's a great quote with like casinos. Like everybody at casinos, if you have a plan, casinos say welcome, because that plan is not going to bear out necessarily the way you want, and you have to be able to audible along the way, and you have to have trustworthy people around who are going to say, "Hey, like you may not want to hear this, but you need to hear this."
Mm-hmm.
And like you may choose that. One of the things Paul says is profitability is a choice, which I think is a really insightful comment here, because as long as the business isn't losing money, I'm not losing as long as we stay above, $1 profitable, but profitability is a choice. The ability to reinvest in things, to give bonuses, to give raises are all predicated on, decisions that you're going to make to drive profitability. And having somebody in there, or having people in your, inner circle, in your leadership team that understand these things are a choice, and that leadership, the reason it's a lonely job at the top is, at the end of the day, like, I made a decision that was ultimately a failure. Right? Like, I would say we should normalize saying that failures are failures. That's what the guy, you had said, like, nothing's a failure if you learn on it. Like, for me, at least, I can only speak from my experience, but being able to go out there and say, like, no, I failed, but then I got back up. And then, like, the business didn't fail, but this was arguably the biggest failure of my career. But I did learn from it. It is something that you can't go back and change it. So I entertain the notion. But to look at it and normalize the fact that failures do happen. And if you acknowledge that, at least for me, I feel more prepared and more eyes open to see potential failures in the future by remembering that, I'm not rationalizing this away. I'm not trying to convince myself that, looking back in rose-colored glasses. It's like, no, this was tough. You can talk to my therapist. She will verify that this was a really, really dark period, but we're stronger than that. And good leaders understand how to navigate their personal leadership style through it, and understand that you have choices, you have decisions that you can make. And some of those decisions can be to shut it down. Some of it might be to shut down the entire company, sell the company. Like, these are all options, and they're all choices that you have. And so I think that's one of the pieces that I fall back on when I think about it, and I get down on myself for some of these other things. You get into things are going bad, and then your brain starts reminding you of all the other bad things that have happened. I kind of go back to it and say, you know what, it's okay that failed. I'm still here. I'm still standing. We got knocked down. I'm going to bear the scars forever, but I got back up, and we were able to right the ship. And while they were some of the hardest decisions that I had to make, and some of the most personally, devastating and challenging things, I still made the right choices, I think. And now we talk about it here, and over a year later, almost a year and a half later, and I can say Knucklepuck is profitable, is successful, is going to have one of our better years since COVID, because of the decisions that were made last year, and because of the fact that we didn't try to pretend it wasn't a failure. We recognized that, yes, unfortunately, despite our best efforts, this was unsuccessful. Once that determination has been made, we had to make the changes. We had to get through it. We had to white knuckle and grit our teeth for a bit, but we made those decisions in the best interest of the longevity of the business.
Well, painful as it is, I know this has been an incredible learning opportunity, not just for you, but also for our listeners. Brett, I really appreciate you sharing that piece. Last episode, you did talk a little bit about how people can go to find you. As a quick refresher, if people wanted to reach out, they have questions about what we shared in this episode, what's the best way for them to chat?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. You find me very easily on LinkedIn. We can go to our website. We're doing a bunch of work for it, so hopefully we'll start seeing some new designs rolling out soon. But my email is brett@knucklepuckmedia.com. You can reach out to me directly. You can ping me on LinkedIn. And if anybody's ever in the DC, Northern Virginia area, I'm always down for coffee or lunch. I think we talked about some of the remote things. I miss some of the in-office pieces, so I like sharing this. So I also want to thank you for encouraging me to share this failure, and to normalize the fact that, everybody has a story that is kind of like this, I think, to varying degrees. But the more that we're able to come to resources like yours, and to get honest, genuine insights, is something that has helped me navigate my dark periods of the business, but also helped inspire me to where we can go next, because I'm not going anywhere. I've got hopefully a long career ahead of me. I love the industry that we're in. I love the people that we work with. And so it's been a great reminder for me, and hopefully for all of our listeners here, that failures are valuable, especially when you're honest about them and you're willing to share them. And so the good and the bad and the ugly, I think, is why we come to people like you, Tony, because you bring the knowledge and the resources together for us.
I love it. Well, this is probably a good, as good a time as any to let our listeners know, if you also have a story It doesn't have to be this incredible growth story. It could also be an example of failure. I would love to hear it. We would love to have you and feature you on the show, especially specifically if you are a digital agency owner. But Brett, I want to thank you again so much. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I have a feeling like we'll probably have more of these into the future.
I hope so. And hopefully we can drive some more interviews, but also some more listeners for it, because this has been I've done a lot of these kind of podcast interviews, but I really like the approach here that you have. It's very natural dialogue for it. And like I said, if anybody had any questions or even wants to hear a little bit more about what it is, and hit me up. I think our industry thrives when people share what they've learned. And so I'm going to leave it with a thank you to you, because you've given me a lot of my praise, but thank you for bringing this together, for giving me the opportunity, encouraging me to share, and hopefully giving all of our listeners here some little nuggets that can get them inspired for, their next growth push.
And thank you to our listeners. If you found value in our episode today, please leave us a review and tell your friends about us. If you're interested in being a guest on our show, as a digital agency owner, or maybe somebody with insights that can help digital agencies grow, head over to our website to learn more at acquip.com/podcast guest. That's ACCQUIP.com/podcast guest.